I went to school at a college in a faded industrial city. Its prosperous years of making typewriters, cars, furniture had left it with many fine Victorian neighborhoods. But to the university, these houses were just so many pickup sticks. They were just a blank space on their plans. There was a college administrator, a vice president of something or other, who was given to rough-hewn statements, the kind of homilies that were meant to strut his populist stuff. He was determined to tear down the old houses. They just weren't practical. We said they can be repaired. There are old wooden houses that have stood for centuries. And all buildings, no matter the material, need repair and renewal. He said, I know a farmer who's had the same axe his whole life. He's only changed the handle 3 times and the head 2 times. Does he have the same axe? I didn't have an answer then, but in the many years since talking with architects, preservationists, carpenters, I've come to realize that so many controversies about saving and rebuilding come down to this one old joke. Whether it's the debates about how to put the Parthenon back together, or about the vinyl siding your neighbor may have put on his cape from 1789, it comes down to this one question. Do we have the same axe? I'm going to answer with 2 riddles. First, what's the oldest unchanged house in the world? Here's a hint. It's made of a common material. It lasts only a season. It's a house of water. Igloos, a form unchanged for 50,000 years, are said to be the oldest shelter known. It was a tradition that lived up until just very recently. One igloo is a perishable item, but it's a song and a performance lasting many millennia. The Inuit wouldn't try to build an Inuit colonial Williamsburg, a Friesland world of igloos that they put on the shelf. It would be like having a room full of silent pianos and not a music school. Okay, here's another riddle. The most rebuilt wooden structures in the world are the most unchanged. The Ise Shrine in Japan is rebuilt almost every 20 years since the year 690 A.D. The outer, inner shrine and 14 affiliated shrines were rebuilt for the 62nd time in the year 2013. This Shinto shrine to the goddess of the sun is made of wood. It's conserved by copying and rebuilding, in keeping with the Shinto's belief in impermanence and renewal. This is how the body maintains itself, after all, replacing cells all the time. We are not the same person we were just a year ago. But we're used to monuments standing against time. We're used to the pyramids standing against the weather. But to the Japanese, Ise is 1,300 years old. It is the same axe 62 times. But it is not ancient enough for the keepers of the list. It's not on UNESCO's list of World Heritage Sites. Completely rebuilding a shrine was once the common practice. Ise is the only shrine to carry this practice forward. The rebuilding begins when the priests go out into the forest to bless the mountainside to protect the workers cutting the timbers. Both the outer and the inner shrines are divided into 2 sectors, and in the empty sector, the new shrine arises alongside the old shrine. And then the old one is taken down, except for the heart pillar, which is left in the little house and protected by its sacred evergreen. And so the new shrine goes forward to age with its companion, an empty white graveled space. Now, Ise is not an exact replica. There have been some changes in 1,300 years. Back in 690, the Imperial Works Bureau took over the building from the priests. And they made some changes in the location of the outer shrine. In the Middle Ages, there was a war in the Japanese islands. And for 120 years, Ise stood as a neglected ruin. In the Victorian era, an opulence snuck in, as it did just about everywhere. And that has been removed. And in modern times, there's been a taste for the finer finish over the rougher finish. But for an object that's passed through thousands of hands, in a society as changed as Japan's, this is as pure as it may get. Ise, the scholars say, maintains the original distinction between sacred and profane space. So, back to that farmer. Does that farmer have the same axe? Yes. His axe is an igloo and a Shinto shrine. He has a surer sense of that axe than someone who may not have ever rebuilt that axe. To remake a thing correctly is to discover its essence. A tool has a double life. It exists in the physical sense, all metal and wood, but it lives in the heart and the mind also. And without those two lives, the tool dies. We've all been to museums and looked at miles of old tools under glass cases that no one knows how to use anymore. And no one knows even whether this is a good example or a bad example of that tool. This farmer has a surer sense of this in his hands. He has a history of axe building in his hands. A repaired axe is a living tradition. We're looking for the trick of having the same axe twice. Impermanence and renewal. That's the key in preservation and in life. Well, all of us here jointly own a U.S. government-sized farmer's axe. Old Ironsides, the USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned warship in the world. Even though it saw its last battle in 1815, the Navy still has it on its roster for the national defense. A duty crew sleeps aboard each night. Old Ironsides had some close calls with oblivion. Being saved one time when a poem, Old Ironsides by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., rallied the nation. Being saved when school children all across the nation sent in their pennies. In 1905, it was in such rough shape that the Navy wanted to tow it out to sea and use it for target practice. In 1920, it leaked so bad, they used to have a tug and pump it out every morning. Saving an old ship is a job that's never done. The USS Constitution has been rebuilt almost every 20 years since 1833. And the last most extensive restoration was from 1992 to 96, when Ise was rebuilding. And the next is scheduled for 2015. Anywhere from 10 to 20% of the ship is original, depending on who you talk to. The further down you go, the older the wood is. Below the waterline, it's from 1851. The keel is original. Salt water is not the enemy of the ship, a ship's restorer told me. Fresh water is what rots the ship. An old ship is like an old house without a roof on. When I visited back during that 90s restoration, Old Ironsides, undefeated in battle, looked as if it had been seized by the crew of this old house. Below deck, it's these narrow decks with low ceilings, and below deck, it was just a modern construction site jammed in there. There was those construction lights in the cages. There was the sounds of hammering and sawing. And from somewhere up in the bow came a wailing guitar riff from some 70s rock hit was playing on the radio. Our tour guide was a sailor who was dressed in a uniform from 1815. It's like a little cowboy hat with a streamer and kind of like a little matador jacket. He told us that 450 men worked on this ship at one time. 450. There was only room for half of them to sleep at one time. And there was livestock aboard as well, and 54 cannons, which were not present during the restoration. They were up the dock, looked like iron cattle, all bedded down. Behind us, as we took this tour, they were lowering these big oak planks in, and some people went away disappointed. They felt like they hadn't seen the ship. But this is the life of the ship. The Constitution is not a ship in the bottle. I went up to the maintenance shed, and I went up several flights of stairs where the rigging loft was. There, 3 men sat tailoring 27 miles of line. One of these guys was 73 years old, Frank Brackett. His father had been a rigger, and he was working at a vise that you could see in a photo from 1890. The youngest fellow there was in charge, Dave Mullen. He used to skip school to look at what they were doing, because this is all he ever wanted to do, was to be a rigger. Rigging, he told me, hasn't changed much in 500 years. They're using the same tools. On the Constitution, they were using a lighter synthetic line so it could be displayed longer for the public. Mullen used everything he could get his hands on, the ship designer's notebooks, a survey of the ship after its last battle in 1815, and these old rigging manuals. And he knew that there was a formula for the order that you stack the rigging on the mast was. He didn't know what it was, but he knew somewhere back there they knew that, and he had to find that out. Didn't know what it was. He was over in a small maritime museum in England. He looked in a glass case, and there was a very old book in there, and he looked at the bottom of the page, and it said, and the formula for stacking the rigging is, and the page stuck. He went and got the curator. The curator came, opened the glass case, they turned the page. David Mullen wrote this formula down, brought it back, and used it in his craft. And that's what I mean by the trick of having the same axe twice. He looked out the window when I was talking to him, and he said, just up a little ways, in 1797, that's where this ship was built. And right now it's in the dry dock, and this was the first ship in that dry dock in 1833. And he said, here it is, more than 200 years later, and we're still building the same ship. So okay, igloos, Ise, Old Ironsides, these are admittedly the purest examples. We don't always get the same axe. The axe may be changed by joyful invention and stubborn blindness. The handle might be awkward, the blade duller. Sometimes things are changed in their use and they become their opposites. Sometimes it is the same axe, a living heritage. Sometimes it's just the best axe at hand, a mix of the old and the new. So, a refinement. It's not the same axe. Not the same ship, not the same igloo, but the life of the axe, igloo, ship, or shrine that continues. Endeavors guided by the Spirit have a double life. Restored tools, houses, farms, nature sanctuaries, telescopes to look at the night sky are important in themselves and in the acts of preservation and loving attention they call forth. In remaking an axe, in restoring a house, we carry the fire of the original spirit. We come in contact with work that might be 300 years old, from a craftsman long gone. And once we really understand that work, really feel it, then we can commit anew and go forward. And therein lies renewal and hope. It's not the way it usually goes. In America, we're pretty much wed to the crash program. The sudden discovery of impending doom, the urgent fundraising appeal, the high-tech application. The scaffolding comes down to reveal a factory fresh, old new building, all scoured, injected with epoxy, and ultimately changed. We focus too often on the finished object, not on the craft to restore it. These things exist for us to revive. They call us back to a proper relationship to our home place and to the world. We don't have village gods anymore, but we need a way to feel the spirit of a place. And a good restoration puts us back in touch with the animating spirits of wood, plaster, brick, mud. It's a little like those old kind of pilgrimages where you bow down and pray at every step. Each time we renew the meeting house steeple, replant the forest, heal an injured animal, teach someone to read, each time we do this, we're restoring the life, the best in us as well. Mending the world, rebuilding it daily, we discover our better angels. We're on the side of life. Why do we save these old things? We save them to save ourselves. Restoration saves the future. True living preservation is the baton pass, the handing off of skills, belief, and love. It's not mummification. It's not stop time. Good preservation is a life preserver thrown to us in a shipwreck. It's about bricks and mortar, certainly. It's about all those arguments you always read about the correct color, the correct material, representation, authenticity. It's about all that. But a good preservation is like the hand that shelters a fire from the wind. It protects the spark of life. Ours is an age of broken connections, lost connections between heart and work, soul and politics, the self and community. Restoration is an effort to renew the world, to mend the world, or else it is just not worth doing. As for that college administrator, he went on leveling and bulldozing old buildings. He only understood the lessons of commodities in a throwaway age. He would have long ago thrown away that axe for a chainsaw. With new things at his touch always, he would have lacked renewal. Thank you.